Hello, I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict. As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers, and also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and if you're a regular viewer of this show, you know my co-host is one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Kent?
Mick, the subject today is Bass Pro. Bringing a Bass Pro store into Bricktown in Oklahoma City. That isn't simply relevant only for Oklahoma City. It's relevant for our Tulsa viewers and our viewers around the state, because the subject really is not, is Bass Pro a good idea or not? The subject really is it a good idea for government to be involved in subsidizing private business to come into a particular community? Lure them in with subsidies.
Lure them in, was that a pun?
Lure them in, yeah, I do that all the time, and I wish I intended to do it, but I don't. But is it a good idea or not? That's the subject. We've got two guests that can talk about this controversial issue, and they don't agree on whether or not it's a good policy here to do it. One thing we can talk about is the soundness of the method that's being used by Oklahoma City to bring in Bass Pro into Bricktown, and we've got the mayor of Oklahoma City back with us again for his third appearance, and we're pleased about that, as well as Senator Henry for his fourth appearance.
Well, as our regular viewers know, Kent and I take an impartial stance on the issues that we discuss, and we let the guests hand out their opinions, and that won't change today. However, I feel compelled for the second week in a row that we've got an issue that really involves the city of Oklahoma City, and since I serve as an Oklahoma City councilman, I have in the past made some public statements on today's issue. That said, my role today will be the same as always, to simply facilitate the discussion, and we'll get started right after this short break. The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leading at 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins had to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our guests.
Today we're pleased to have two return guests. On my right is the Honorable Brad Henry. Senator Henry is a senator from Shawnee, has been on our show a number of times, is an economist, is one of the leading members of the state legislature dealing with business issues. And Senator Henry, we are very pleased that you join us again for the fourth time.
Thank you, Ken. Always a pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure for us. On my left is the Honorable Kirk Humphreys, the mayor of the city of Oklahoma City, and returning for his third visit on The Verdict.
Good to be back.
I keep track of these things, and the good visitors get asked back.
Well, you guys pay so well, we'll just come anytime.
Yes, the honorarium might take another penny sales tax.
Just overwhelming.
We're so pleased to have you back, Mayor. You're really the principal spokesperson for the city, of course, and the Bass Pro issue is one that is very current and one that we want to talk about today. You have been in charge of the economic revitalization of downtown Oklahoma City, including Bricktown, and the viewers will be very pleased to hear what you have to say about why Bass Pro should be a part of Bricktown. So thanks for coming.
You bet.
Let's just get right to that, Mayor. Tell the viewers what generally is a Bass Pro store.
Yeah, Bass Pro Outdoor World started in Springfield, Missouri, I think about 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, and they now have, I believe, 12 stores around the country. It's unlike anything you've ever seen if you've never been to it. Generally, they're 100,000 to 150,000 square feet, and it's like Disneyland for the outdoorsmen and sportsmen. They have waterfalls, they have driving ranges inside the store. Basically, you can try out the products inside the store. It's all kinds of sporting goods and sportsman's equipment. It's been tremendous. 400,000 people a year come to Springfield, Missouri to visit that store. The closest store to Oklahoma City is down in Grapevine, Texas.
Let me interrupt. 400,000 people from outside Springfield
That's right.
come to Springfield to
Come to
visit that
Springfield.
store?
I mean, I've been to the store twice. I think most of us have been to the store in Springfield. One of your fellows here in the studio had a Bass Pro mug that he bought in Springfield, and he still uses on a daily basis. So it's one of those things that'll do a couple things for any city. It'll bring people off the interstate, and it'll bring people from a long ways away. It's not just to serve your metro area or your neighborhood or your community. It serves a broad area, 100 to 200 miles away and more. So it's a very unusual retailer.
Well, sticking with you for a minute, Mayor, how did this idea come about?
The idea came about, we have a developer that's working on a tract of land, about 30-acre tract south of the ballpark in Bricktown, TMK Hogan, and the original concept was for this tract to be anchored by a stadium-seated theater complex, multi-screen theater. And that's still, they're moving forward with the Sega GameWorks combination with a theater. But Bass Pro came into the picture and has an interest in coming to Oklahoma City, and so the proposal now is that Bass Pro would be the first job in the phasing, and then the theater would come in the second phase.
Well, explain to the viewers, and then I'm going to ask Senator Henry for his view about some of these things. Explain to the viewers what you perceive to be the controversy about Bass Pro coming to Oklahoma City.
The proposal is this. The proposal is that the city would build an $18 million building and lease it to Bass Pro. No problem with that. The problem comes in that they would lease it to Bass Pro at below market rates. And the city would make up the difference with increased sales tax revenue from that tract. So right now we're getting no sales tax revenue from that tract. We've had no new retail in downtown in decades. And so the proposal basically is the city owns the land already. We'd build a building on it. We would own it. We're not giving Bass Pro $18 million. We're spending $18 million on a building that we would own. But the favorable consideration for Bass Pro would be that they would lease that building at below what a market rate would dictate.
What would the term of the lease be, the duration of the lease?
You know, it's 20 to 25 years, and we don't have all that worked out. One thing I'd like to stress on this is not a decision that's been made. It's a decision that's under study. The city has hired a consulting firm to look at that. Many of the questions that people are raising are the same questions we have. And the consulting firm is supposed to report back to us next month. Then we'll know better whether this is a good deal for Oklahoma City or not. That has not been determined yet. No decision has been made. But it is something we're studying and talking about.
I take it at this moment, based upon the best information you have, you think it's something we ought to move forward with?
I think that would be an overstatement, really, Kent. We want to get the facts,
okay,
and then we want to make a decision. The questions are, how much of this how many of these sales tax dollars are new sales tax dollars to Oklahoma City, or how much are we trading?
Yeah.
Trading robbing Peter to pay Paul, if I could put it that way. Trading sales tax dollars. Where are the shoppers going to come from? How many are local? How many are metro? How many are statewide? How many new people are we going to bring? How many people are going to take off the interstate, pull off the interstate because of a Bass Pro Shop being there that another local business might not be able to pull off the interstate? What's the advisability of a city treating a large retailer like Bass Pro in this way vis-a-vis other retailers in town? What are other cities around the nation doing? What's the impact if we choose to not do this? You know, quite frankly, I just tell you, there's another municipality immediately adjacent to Oklahoma City that's made a pitch to Bass Pro more favorable than ours, and they would love to do it. So it's not a question, you know, retailers compete, so do cities. It's not a question, are we going to have a Bass Pro in the metro area? Very well, the question could be, are we going to have a Bass Pro in Oklahoma City or across the municipal line 5 miles away? That becomes a competitive situation, and we live in a competitive world too.
Senator Henry, have you ever been to a Bass Pro?
Yes, Ken, I have. Enjoyed it very much.
Are you a fisherman?
I am. I'm a fisherman. I'm a hunter, avid outdoorsman.
Well, then you're obviously in favor of this, right?
Well, I'll tell you what. I have no disagreement with the mayor in terms of getting a Bass Pro Shop to Oklahoma City and the Bricktown area in particular. I think it would be wonderful for Oklahoma City. And the mayor has been a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars in the past, and I'm sure will continue to do so. My concern, and where we possibly differ, is the way that we get them here through what I like to call corporate welfare, taxpayer-financed subsidies to businesses. The proposal is that the city will build a 110,000 square foot building for the cost of approximately $18 million to be financed through revenue bonds. Those revenue bonds will be paid for from sales tax revenues produced by the Bass Pro Shop and lease payments from the Bass Pro Shop, as well as, very likely, other types of sales tax revenues. And the problem is those are revenues that, the problem is multifold actually, but those are revenues that could be used for police and fire protection, for roads, for water and sewer infrastructure, for other things than to give a handout to a private sector business and a retail business. The real problem is, where do you stop with these kinds of taxpayer-financed incentives? If we give one to Bass Pro, then who's next? And what businesses that are currently located in Oklahoma and in Oklahoma City, Mayor, will then say, hey, if you don't give me a good deal like you gave Bass Pro, then we're going to pull out of Oklahoma City. It's this slippery slope concern. It's not healthy, I think, to, in my opinion, to be competing with other states or even cities within our great state in terms of who can give the biggest tax benefits, tax incentives to private business.
I need to jump in here and get us to a break. We'll be right back. We're discussing the issue of a public subsidy to a private business. You're watching The Verdict.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. affordable private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory's special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful.
You can say that again.
On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. We're discussing the proposed $18 million subsidy that Oklahoma City is considering to help lure a national retailer to Bricktown, namely Bass Pro. We're talking to State Senator Brad Henry and Oklahoma City Mayor Kirk Humphreys. And Kent, this is really a statewide issue because it gets into that larger issue of should a city give a subsidy to bring in a private company, a private business, whether it's for job creation or for retail business.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Now, I just have to point out to our viewers that you said lure also. But
Freudian slip.
We'll go right on by that. Let's pull up a graphic. I want to see what the economics editor of the Daily Oklahoman said recently in relation to this subject. Subsidies beget more subsidies. Senator Henry, what do you think about that?
Kent, I absolutely agree, and that's part of my point. The city of Oklahoma City and no city in this state can expect to grant a taxpayer subsidy to a private business and not have other businesses come to the trough and want some of those subsidies. I mean, that is just simple logic. It will happen, it does happen, and has happened nationally. Most of the studies, and I would say the only viable argument or real argument for these kinds of taxpayer subsidies, corporate welfare, whatever you want to call them, is they create more jobs.
They make the pie bigger.
They make the pie bigger, and that's the argument that we'll hear. I tend to think they're pie in the sky types of schemes, but that is the argument. They make the pie bigger. They induce tourists into downtown and create more jobs. There has been study after study. I mean, we're not the first state to tinker around with tax incentives or corporate subsidies. There have been study after study by moderate groups around the nation that have indicated that there is no credible evidence that these kinds of taxpayer handouts to corporate business create additional jobs.
Well, Mayor, what do you think? Will the pie get bigger?
Well, that's what we're studying. That's what we've hired consultants to do. Just to be clear, it's not an $18 million subsidy. It's an $18 million building that the city will own. And the amount of the favorable consideration below market rates that Bass Pro would receive will depend on the outcome of this study if we decide to do it at all. Secondly, it would have benchmarks in there that Bass Pro would have to meet as far as volume and generating sales tax, things of that nature. So to say the city has made a decision already is not accurate at all. We're getting the facts on it so that we can make an informed decision. You know, I think to say that subsidies beget more subsidies, it sounds cute. I think it's simplistic. You know, business and government, as much as I would love, my dad says all he wants out of government is to leave him alone. But they don't leave him alone. I pay taxes, Brad pays taxes, we all pay taxes, and so the government's getting in our pocket every day. And you better believe that every kind of special interest is lobbying the state legislature and the federal Congress to give them more favorable consideration than they're getting from someone else. So as much as I'd like for government to stay out of business, government is inextricably involved in business. The question is this a good deal for Oklahoma City? That's what we need to determine in the next 30 to 60 days. We don't have the information yet. We're getting the information. We may come out and say, hey, we've tried to do the best we can. It's not a good deal for Oklahoma City. Let them go down the road 5 miles to another municipality who's willing to throw more money at them. You may still have a Bass Pro in the metro area.
Let me ask you this. Done a little homework on this and noticed that the Gaylords have, one of their entities has some ownership interest in Bass Pro, a minority interest, but an ownership interest nevertheless. Does the fact that the Gaylords are involved in Bass Pro, does that enter into the city's decision making?
I don't think so at all. I don't think it ought to influence us favorably or unfavorably. Again, the question is it a good deal? Does it make sense for Oklahoma City?
I guess if they personally guarantee it, it might help.
I doubt that they would do that. We'd certainly be able to take that, be willing to take that into consideration. The Gaylords are business people, and quite frankly, we're business people too, and I would expect for Bass Pro and the Gaylord family to do what they believe is in their best interest. We need to do what's in the best interest of Oklahoma City. We'll get a deal if all three of those coincide. We're nowhere near that yet.
Yeah. Now we're dealing with the type of merchandise, sporting goods, fishing equipment, and so on. I want to pull up another graphic now, if we may. It's the statement of an Oklahoma City businessman. What is the rationale you will give, Senator Henry, to the local residents for spending $18 million of their money to bring in merchandise that's already available in Oklahoma City? We can't forget about the people who are already selling merchandise, at least generally of this type. What would you respond to John Henry, no relation to you?
Absolutely no relation, Kent. I don't disagree with John Henry. I think he has a valid concern. And it's one thing to consider taxpayer incentives or tax incentives for an entire sector, such as the manufacturing industry or the service industry or the technology industry, that doesn't necessarily compete with other specific groups of the same size.
Well, it's one thing to bring in a General Motors that's making cars, because you don't have another General Motors making cars already in Oklahoma City.
Absolutely. But this is, at least in my experience, this is plowing some new territory when you talk about giving tax incentives to retail businesses, because you're giving a business that sells products that other Oklahoma City proprietors and businesses sell a leg up in the competitive market. And I just don't think that that's good policy for government.
Brad, what about the mayor's argument that cities compete against other municipalities? Where do you come down on that? Should cities get into bidding wars for companies, if this is a bidding war?
Well, I suppose that's up to the city leaders, their elected officials. I think it becomes problematic.
From an economist's point of view, from your background as an economist, is that good policy?
Sure. I think it's healthy for cities to compete. But I think it is unhealthy for cities to compete in terms of who can give the biggest taxpayer subsidy to the private sector industry. That is not a good thing, because then we're all competing to throw away our tax dollars to the private sector, and we're neglecting the public sector: education, roads, police and fire, sewer and water infrastructure.
We've got to wrap it up there. Senator Henry, thanks for coming. Mayor Humphreys.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming by. Kent and I'll have a few final thoughts when we return. You're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Myers.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We are back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict. Today we discuss the concept of a government entity providing a financial subsidy to help bring in a national retailer. Namely, in this case, the city of Oklahoma City attempting to lure Bass Pro to Bricktown. Kent?
Well, we saw that Bass Pro went fishing and caught Oklahoma City, perhaps. And that may or may not be a bad thing. In a nutshell, the argument for that is that Bass Pro does indeed make the pie bigger. The more dollars come in through the I-35, I-40 intersection. People come in, do their shopping, spend some money that they wouldn't do otherwise. That helps the city generally. The argument on the other side is that it doesn't help potentially doesn't help the small retailer who didn't get the same subsidy. It's really a very hot issue in Oklahoma City, and one that would be hot no matter what city it occurred in.
And we'd like you to voice your opinion on this issue and, of course, every other issue that we have on this television show. You can do that by going on the World Wide Web and visiting our website, theverdict.tv. This specific question, should a city provide a subsidy to bring in a private retailer? I'd like to thank Senator Brad Henry and Mayor Kirk Humphreys of Oklahoma City for joining us. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.